Actually, that'd be cool. Maybe I can use that.
Yeah, I can just send it to
Yeah,
you.
that'd be cool.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Slide.
All we have to do is make sure Cyron doesn't.
And I'll close the door.
Yeah.
Just pass it when you're ready. If I asked you right now, how many of you would be comfortable if someone came into the room and I told you that they would insert a chip into your brain and they would be able to scan your electromagnetic activity? Can you show hands if you would be comfortable with this? Okay, I don't see anyone comfortable. If I had to have someone come and do a surgery to you entirely with a machine without a human actually doing the surgery, would anyone here be comfortable? One person.
He's lying.
That is the surgery.
Okay, come on in. Someone open the door for a surgeon. And so yeah, another question. How many of you, okay, that's it. How many of you would be comfortable to get into a stranger's car or into a stranger's home? Raise your hands. Two people? Three people?
You guys know everything.
How many of you how many of you would be comfortable getting into a stranger's home or stranger's car? Okay. How many of you have used Uber or Lyft? Everyone. How many of you would be comfortable going to something called the internet and putting your credit or debit card information to a company that you've never heard of and make a payment expecting not only that they will not steal your data, but also that you will receive whatever you paid for? Raise your hands. So everyone has already done half of those things. But the first part is things that are yet to happen in the future and things that we still perceive as things that are scary or things that are science fiction or things that maybe a lot of us wouldn't feel comfortable doing. Same way in the past, like a lot of people weren't comfortable with the idea that they will use the internet or pay through the internet, or they weren't comfortable with the idea to go into an Uber car, or they weren't comfortable with the idea to use Airbnb of just a random person that they didn't know. The reason I'm mentioning all of these things is to appreciate how fast the world is changing and how things that we still perceive as science fictions and things that we still perceive as something that is kind of scary is very rapidly changing and is very soon going to become something normal to each one of us. This is where my presentation is going to be about the value of big data, and I'm going to mainly focus on things such as how big data is actually going to transform our lives in the future, and focus on particularly first, what is big data? Second, how big data is going to increase our efficiency and life expectancy, amongst other benefits. Third, I will focus on the challenges, and the biggest one being privacy and security of having so much data. And the last one, I will talk about the conclusion of all this and how this actually affects Cisco. So, two things that I want to achieve by the end of this presentation, by the way, outside of this agenda, and things that if you can walk away with, I would feel like this presentation has been successful, is if you at the end of the presentation can appreciate how big this field is and how rapidly it's going to change each one of our lives, and understand that this is something really, really important. And second of all, to actually kind of encourage some of you to think more about this area, because every person in this room has the potential to actually impact the field of big data, machine learning, of data science. And if you can feel that this is an area that you're interested in, I would feel super, super happy that you are not only going to be standing in the next 10, 20, 30 years watching how the world is changing, but actually be one of the people who is making those changes. So this is really the presentation. And I want to ask a question, and I don't expect a perfect answer, by the way, but I want to hear, what do you guys think is data? Like, can you start with saying like random things? And this is something I didn't know as well, and I couldn't define, but I just want to hear from some of you. What do you think?
Organized information.
Organized information. Someone else?
No, not organized information.
Also.
Not organized information. Someone else?
Shopping preferences.
Shopping preferences. Okay. Someone else?
Zeros and ones.
Cool. Zeros and ones. So the reason I'm asking this actually, it's kind of, everyone mentions the word data and we've heard it a million times, but I feel that it's such a commonly used word that we feel like we should know, but there is not enough actually awareness about what this word actually means and how this word fits into the context of big data, and what are the different types of data, information, etc. And there's a very popular explanation of how actually big data, how actually data is, what are the elements of data or information or etc. And when we look at this, we see that data is just the very, very raw not even information, but the raw numbers, letters, maybe words that we cannot actually comprehend. These are things that are just standing there for a computer, and it cannot actually make sense of any of this if we don't actually start processing it. So this is a very, very important term to understand when we start to talk about big data, because big data is not a sensible information. And that's one of the biggest challenges about understanding and about actually analyzing big data, because we just collect from millions and billions of sensors, raw numbers that need to be processed. Then we get to the second stage of data, which is actually information. So in this example, like if we had data that there is color red, and we have coordinates of maybe a server where this red color is located, we can then create information, but by teaching a machine that the red color actually is placed here, and now it's not just random information, but it has some sort of label. It has some sort of explanation that we can say, okay, this is there. We still don't understand the purpose of it, and it's still not valuable to us to know it, but at least it's a better step to understand it. So what happens after? We want to get to actually knowing what this means, right? And the next step is actually transforming this information into knowledge. And knowledge is when we not only see that there's some red in certain place in our camera, and not only that we understand that red is on the traffic light on this location, but what do you have to actually interpret from that red? And in that situation, like it would be that when you see red color, you need to stop. Or that you're driving towards it actually. So you still don't know that you need to take certain action. You just, at this point, you kind of have useful information, but it's still not enough for you to make any sort of decisions. And this is not only in technology, but in real life as well. Because if you don't have the ability to take decision, all of these three layers are almost useless. And so what happens with wisdom, and this is really where AI is happening, is you are able to take all those different types of information, put them together, and say, if you see all this, then the right decision is to stop the car. And this is really, really fascinating, because when we talk about data, very few people actually think about this and the escalation from big data to actually making decisions. So I already touched upon it, but just to go over it, like what is big data? having understanding of all those different elements now helps us to understand what big data actually is. And big data is all the information that we have in the world, all the numbers, all the letters, if you will, all the videos, all the text files, basically information about how we act and etc. And the most interesting thing about big data, and actually I will go over the cycle later, but the most interesting thing about big data is that this is the data that we've had since the beginning of humanity, and it's measured in exabytes, which is massive amounts of data. And if you see, until the year 2007 and 8, we almost had 0. From 2008 to 2012, we've only managed to increase a little bit. And the most interesting thing to show is that just in those 2 years, we generated more data in the internet than all the data available to humanity in all the years before. So this is something extremely fascinating. And the more fascinating thing is, imagine that this was already incredible achievement in terms of getting data, but it has been almost doubling every 2 years since then. And the most interesting thing to realize is that even though we've been hearing about big data a lot over the last 5 years, it's still a field that is growing super rapidly and it hasn't stopped growing. Yeah, so this is something that I really wanted to emphasize, just to appreciate how important it is. And another question is, what actually caused this? We've had the internet for a while. We've had it since the 2000s. People have been using it. There has already been like a large user base. So what makes big data start to grow after 2008? Can anyone make any suggestion? Any guesses as to why it took longer for big data? There's multiple reasons, by the way.
The open of internet, the bandwidth we have one more, like the speed, the internet access speed is higher and higher.
Yep, this is one.
People realize the value of data.
This is another. Someone said
Financial crisis.
financial crisis.
Maybe development of mobile phones.
Okay, that's a good one too. Well, there is two main reasons actually, and I kind of list them as external reason and internal reason. And the external reason is obviously companies like Google and Facebook started thinking, what if we actually understand all the people that use our platforms, and we can make profiles and analysis based on those people and sell this to advertisers. And this has only been starting to develop in those years, and there has been this movement of, okay, you know, like actually we can make a lot of database in this because there's a lot of demand for companies to easily target the right people on the internet, because it's such a easily accessible platform and it's so easy to like target the right people. But as I think Janto or some other people said, the internal reason that arguably changed the mindset of a lot of people is the financial crisis in 2008. And I won't spend too much time talking about it, but the financial crisis was essentially a lot of assumptions that people will be able to pay mortgages, that people will be able to repay loans, and a lot of assumptions that when you interact with banking institutions, those banking institutions are credible and the scores that they provide are credible. And in fact, there were so many assumptions made from many different parties in that period, especially from banks, that people will pay back mortgages, and they kept lowering their standards. But what happened is they weren't actually tracking a lot of that data. They weren't testing whether this is the case. So it was all like, we are just assuming that people will pay. We don't really know. We've never done this in the past to the extent that we are doing it now. And there is demand from investors to keep doing it, so whatever, we'll just try. And because of the lack of actually following data and actually like surveilling it, essentially people didn't pay back mortgages, and all the money that you've essentially had or paid like disappears in a moment when banks go like bankrupt and they cannot get the money that they need. So this is when a lot of companies were like, okay, we actually need to track our data. We actually need to have a more rigorous system, and also there were more regulations, much tighter regulations that encourage companies to think about first internally how to set up like a strong, rigorous data structure. But secondly, once you start that, you can then start to analyze, okay, I'm already doing data analysis or I'm already tracking data. What if I also start developing data in that movement that is happening in terms of collecting data and using it to build better relationships with customers. Can someone tell me the time, because I don't have a timer?
43 minutes.
Okay. So this is the part of the presentation that I'm really like the most excited about, and it's basically how big data will lead us to being more efficient. And by efficient, I actually mean how it will save us time and how it will save us money. So the biggest example for me, and like the biggest thing that I'm passionate about in big data, is actually neural analysis. And as I already mentioned, neural analysis is about putting a chip inside of your brain or something similar to that, and being able to track your electromagnetic impulses, to understand your mood, to understand your thoughts, to understand whether you like something or you dislike something. And this has incredible potential, by the way. For example, the first thing that really strikes me is how good are we actually at understanding ourselves? How good are we at understanding our thoughts, our feelings, our strengths, our weaknesses? A lot of us kind of go through life with some understanding, or they go through school with some understanding, but we've only like touched the surface of what we are as individuals. And I feel like the biggest potential really to use something like this is to really go deeper into how you think as a human and be able to track that data and make report on what you are as a person. And what this will do is actually lead you to be more not only self-conscious, but to actually make better decisions about your life based on what kind of strengths you have, based on what things you like, based on really all those things that can define you better as a person. The next thing is education at the moment is incredibly generalized, and this gives us more ability to actually understand individual students, to understand their performance, and to actually section people better into the right groups of students that can perform in different speed, that can perform better on different subjects, or just understand which people fit better into certain subjects and optimize a lot better the system of education. Another big benefit is actually understanding mental health. And there are two big advantages to that. First of all is a lot of people having mental health problem don't necessarily know that they have mental health problem, or it might be until a later point that they understand. So this advantage or this chip can easily understand when there is discrepancies within your electromagnetic activity, and actually suggest that you might have a mental health problem, which first is good for you to be more self-conscious of yourself, but second, it can actually enable better treatment for you from a professional. This is even more far-fetched, but we want to think that at some point it will be so easy for something like a scan to understand your thought process that, for example, when you're going to pick your car from the garage, your electromagnetic impulses are already sending like the intention to a device that can start opening your garage door, or things like this that kind of make you more like a superhuman that is able to do subconscious, that is able to complete subconscious tasks through the use of something like neuromagnetic scan. Another benefit is advanced recommendations. This is really the point at which we will understand humans incredibly well, and we will be able to get to the point where we are not only suggesting things based on their behavior, but based on what they think and what they have in terms of electromagnetic activity, which could be dangerous, but it can bring a lot of benefits as well. Another, and again, can I ask about that?
47.
Another one is Internet of Things. Now, Internet of Things, we've all heard most of the benefits, and there's not so much need for me to explain a lot of them. And by the way, just before I finish this, like there's already effort. I don't know how many of you heard about Neuralink, which is Elon Musk's attempt to create this sort of chip that can achieve a lot of those benefits. But yeah, so like about the Internet of Things. Most of those benefits are things that we already know. So being able to connect a lot of devices within your home, or being able to connect large areas within cities and even bigger physical areas in order to provide data, in order to control different sensors or devices from one device. For example, controlling your home just with your phone, which is already something that has happened to a huge extent, but still has potential. The other two benefits are more affecting not only you as an individual, but how the cities and populations function. And one big benefit is actually being able to understand demand in real time and being able to improve transportation system throughout many cities across the world, which can dramatically reduce costs, the use of fuels, etc. The next thing is, and this is again one of the big advantages of using IoT, is actually being able to connect electric grids and make smart electric grids, which are able to better understand the demand in different areas and reduce electricity waste by actually adjusting for that demand, building electricity grids at the right location. And this again reduces environmental footprint and makes things cheaper in the end of the day. The other things we've already heard about, but AI vehicles will bring significant improvement to our lives as well, particularly enabling us to work while we have to commute, and they can save us hours every day, or give us hours every day that we can use to do something. They will lower transportation costs eventually when the models scale, because especially for like when you have to use something like Uber, and Uber is one of the biggest investors in this area actually. When you have to pay for Uber, it's much cheaper to pay for a system that has already scaled and has been made cheaper than to keep paying drivers fees or to keep paying them salaries. The next thing is actually developing cooking and artificial intelligence in the kitchen. And cooking is actually again one of the big areas on which we spend time every day. And this can be something like half an hour, it can be 2 hours a day, it can be even more. But this is again an area which is most likely going to go under transformation in the future years, and is actually going to change our lives as well, make us healthier because of the more choices of food that you can cook, make it tastier, and actually lower the cost as well. Another thing, and again, can I ask about that?
51.
How big data will actually lead to increased life expectancy? And I think this is a very interesting topic because it's very medical related, but at the same time, we've already been able to touch upon all of the areas that I'm going to present. And the first and biggest one, which I was able to kind of put here, is the ability to actually change genetics and actually create organs through machine learning. And gene reconstruction specifically is especially important because we've still been, although we've had successes in fighting cancer, we still have a lot of problems in actually beating cancer. And something like reconstructing genetics, which have already been damaged by cancer, is one of the biggest ways to actually battle cancer in the future. So it's a very big area that scientists want to develop, and it's one of the most fascinating to me in terms of actually what big data can help us achieve. The next one is the disease detection, and here we are talking about early prevention of disease. So something like having a smartwatch, or having like a small chip in your leg, which I've heard about, or just different things that are attached to you that can monitor your health, can definitely improve your life expectancy or prevent certain diseases. Because let's be real, how honest do we really know when we have a certain disease right away? Like, it's very, unless it's very obvious and it has very serious symptoms that we can notably understand, it's very hard for us to know that we have higher, maybe like blood pressure, that we are in the very early stages of cancer. These are things that, unless you go for a test, sometimes you wouldn't really know. So these are, this is the first thing that it achieves. Second thing is, when you actually go to a doctor, it's much more likely that machine learning algorithm will be able to diagnose the type of cancer that you have, or another disease, or like a lung disease, than a trained doctor will, just because of the amount of data that machine learning can process. And the third thing, which is interesting as well, is one of the hardest thing when you're in chemotherapy or you're a cancer patient, is actually feeling that there is no result, or actually feeling that there's no point in continuing or on trying. And this is where something like disease detection, or being able to track yourself, can help you a lot in understanding how your health is performing on a daily basis or in real time, and actually show you that there is benefit to you trying, that there is benefit to you eating healthier, to you sleeping more, etc. So like, this provides sort of first state data for you to understand better how this is useful. But second, it actually provides real-time data for your doctor, because a lot of the time, doctors also don't know whether the patient is following what they have to on a daily basis, or whether they follow all the steps that they have to. The next one is AI treatment, as I already mentioned in the beginning. AI treatment is basically, instead of having a surgeon in the room, it's a machine that can actually take care of your surgery, or actually perform things that surgeons or other doctors can. So the benefits of that is, again, higher accuracy, higher availability, because you can have much more machines than you can potentially have surgeons, and you can have them available 24/7. And the last thing is, when you scale a machine, it's actually much cheaper, because you don't need to pay them for 10-15 years of education. You don't need to pay them for essentially being a limited resource. And yeah, and the last one is actually personalized medicine, and this again is very impactful. And I'm talking about a lot about cancer research, not because I've picked on this specifically, but because it's one of the biggest areas that we're still struggling to sort of beat, and it's one of the biggest areas of medicine. So a lot of this really applies well to cancer patients. But personalized medicine, essentially, the way we're using medicine now is we're developing the same sort of medical solution based on the stage in which you're at, or the disease that you have. And this is not taking into account that biologically you might be a different individual to another individual who is in the same stage of the same disease. And regardless of being in the same sort of, on the surface, same disease, you have different needs of different medication. And what this does is it allows people to actually understand your biology and choose the medicine that is actually better targeted to you, or develop medicine that is actually better suited to you. And this has less side effects, because you obviously remove all the medicine that is not necessary, which happens a lot at the moment when, if you're going through chemotherapy, you would take a lot of medicine that is not necessarily proven to be helping you, but it's just the things that they give you because it's just the safest thing to do. And the other benefit is like you can actually lower the cost when you don't have to put so many, you don't have to pay for so much medicine, you only pay for the one that you need. And you can actually develop medicine that is better customized to the patient, which if you make it use less chemical ingredients, and if you can make this developed by a robot, can essentially lower the cost of medicine. Having presented all those benefits, an interesting point to talk about is, okay, we already know that there's huge value in big data. We already know that there's great future ahead of the area, and these are very small amount of benefits. Like big data can impact many other areas like agriculture, politics, etc. But it's worth also taking a look at the sort of negative side and how big data can actually be very detrimental as well. And so the big two things that have been discussed over the past years, and mainly the things that you attach in terms of negative to big data, is really the privacy and the security. And the questions that you ask in terms of privacy specifically is, do people actually give their consent to have their data collected? And most of the time they don't really, even though they sign an agreement. What a lot of people have agreed is that people don't actually understand what they're signing to. People don't really know the implications of them giving their data. And especially with companies like Facebook and Google, like this can have very bad consequences if this data is to be revealed, or if someone in Facebook decided to take that data and do something with it. And we think that this data is safe, and a lot of people assume that it's okay to give that data, but in fact, it's good to have consciousness that this data is still vulnerable, and it is still up to Facebook to actually protect it, or Google or whatever. The second question is, are people actually safe? And although we like to think that we are, there's still a lot of breaches. There are many breaches every year that happen. So, for example, I don't know, like a few years ago, there was like a breach in Target where a lot of people got their credit cards stolen. Like, so there are things that happen every year, and some of them have been incredibly bad. But this is also again a concern. And when you have Internet of Things, and when you have more and more data, there is much more access points from which people can target you and break into your network. And if they can break into from your bulb, or they can break into from your automatic door or something like this, which is connected to the network, then they can get incredible amount of information about you, and they can do horrible things if they wanted to. And these are just two of the scandals where Cambridge Analytica, which we've all heard of, has been mainly attached to the consent part, where people were basically targeted with a lot of political advertisement, and it's believed that it actually impacted the election of Trump to a huge extent, because people were receiving sometimes fake advertisements, sometimes very targeted advertisement that sort of influenced them in a certain way over the platform. And this is where people have not really consented to that, or they have not consented to have their information shared with advertisers, but Facebook managed to share really huge amount of information based on what they look at on Facebook, based on what they click, based on what they like, and a lot of things like this weren't actually up to consent. The next thing that happened just a few weeks ago is the project Nightingale, which is a secret project that has been running at Google. The quick story behind it is they acquired a medical company, and the medical company is following medical regulations in the US. But basically Google, as a separate entity from that company, even though it's part of Google, took the data from the company, and they've been doing machine learning on that company within Google, which is actually not following all the medical regulations, since they're not a medical company. So the reason why this is big again is Google didn't notify anyone about this project. They kept it a secret, and the moment that this became revealed and there was whistleblower revealing it, they were like, oh, we are proud to announce our partnership with this company, or we are proud to announce how we are using that data, but they're only announcing it now that this has been revealed and not months since it started. So we can kind of feel already that there are a lot of things happening behind your back in terms of data and things that companies don't want you to know about data. And it's just something to be conscious about, since there will be more and more and more data that is available for you. And again, the question in the end is this all moral? And can I ask about time again?
202.
202. Yeah, the question we want to ask is, in the end, is this all moral? I would kind of say it's not. To a huge extent, I do believe that the benefits of big data are real, and I do believe that it will be a great future to live in with all the benefits that I talked about. And I would be, for sure, one of the people to put a chip in my brain, even if that sounds weird, but I think that this is where we're headed. And I think it will be something really that improves our civilization dramatically. But at the same time, I don't think that the companies who are using that data are using it in transparent, honest, and respectful way. And a lot of the times they will really try to cheat you, or they will try to take the data and use it for their own benefit. And they are happy if you actually don't know what happens to that data. There have been a lot of regulations that come into place over the last few years. In Europe, there has been the global data protection legislation that happened, I think, last year. And this has been a huge change to how companies actually reveal to customers what data they use and etc. So there are a lot of moves in the right direction from politicians, but it's still one of the disadvantages of big data. So the conclusion I want to talk about is, actually, we are going into a world where big data will be able to improve our lives dramatically, but at the same time develop so much intelligence that a lot of the jobs, not only of drivers of Uber, not only of surgeons, but a lot of the jobs that we have right now, and it's estimated that over 80% of jobs will be replaced by robots by 2060. This just goes to show that we are transitioning into a society that is no longer about knowing things or being able to do things. Although it's useful at the moment, we're turning into a society that is going to be about being creative. It's going to be about actually thinking out of the box and doing all the things that artificial intelligence isn't by default good at, which are like, for example, drawing something, or like just thinking out of the box for innovation that can happen, or deciding on strategy, or a lot of those areas that you can't necessarily program AI in every single situation, and human can do a lot better. You can argue in a lot of the cases. The next one is, yeah, the next point I want to make is, we are really living in a world that's changing super fast, and I think that it's hard for us to appreciate that on a daily basis, where we live our life and we don't feel like the world is changing. But if we look at the grand scale of things, and if we look at that data graph, or like if we look at how fast we went from 1990s, where we had the Macintosh, which was a very basic computer, to actually having a smartphone that has the same, or like that has much better power than a computer. It's like crazy to actually understand this progress, and to imagine that for the last thousands of years we've been progressing with technology every 150 years, and now it's sort of like every 3, every 2, every 1 year. And the last point is, big data is really the future, and it's really an area which is worth understanding, that if you get involved into, there is definitely benefit, because it's transforming the way we all live, and it's actually the biggest value-making resource. Probably a lot of you have already heard the sentence that big data is now the new oil, because the biggest companies right now are only making profit because they have data. If you look at Google and Facebook, which are 2 of the biggest companies, they really make all of their money based on selling data. And this goes to show how actually important this resource is and how much opportunity there is to make an impact in that area. The last thing is, I actually want to focus a little bit on what this actually means for Cisco, and having already provided all this context in the how big data is impacting the world, what does Cisco have in terms of role to play in this area? And to actually explain this, it's worth looking at how the big data cycle looks like and what are the steps in which you can actually contribute. And the first step is obviously collecting data. In the future, we will have millions and billions of sensors around our houses, around our cities, and collecting that data is the first step. You need an infrastructure, you need a network to collect it, and after you collect it, you need to store it. Not only store it in a database, which is probably going to be cloud, but you also need to secure that data and make sure that it is very well protected against the increasing number of threats that can come to you. The next is processing that data, and this can be either processing it to look for correlations in the beginning, or already having trained machine models to compare against when you already have the data, in order to actually make insights about new incoming data and make decisions about it, and actually leading to the last stage, which is being able to either visualize that data or feed it into a system that needs that data, for example, a self-driving car, which needs to go through this process like very quickly. Like it needs to collect the data, process it very fast, and then make a decision in milliseconds. So this is the cycle essentially. It's simplified, but I want to just outline where Cisco is positioned within that data cycle. The biggest area which Cisco is really strong in is the part of collecting the data. So Cisco will most likely continue to be one of the big companies in terms of making sure that you're able to collect the data from all of those sensors, providing the infrastructure and the network to collect them. And at the moment, most companies would probably go to like AWS to store their data. And Cisco is already partnering with AWS in terms of their security side of cloud service. But this is where Cisco also plays a small role in terms of securing that data, but not as big of a role as they would play in the collecting phase. As far as I understand, Cisco is not really involved in those two areas, or not significantly. So what most people would probably do is store their data in AWS, use AWS tools to process it, and then this is sort of an independent thing where they can choose how to do it, whether to do it internally, whether to choose like supplier. Cisco could take some of this portion, but at the moment, they're not doing it to a big extent. So the recommendation really is, first of all, Cisco really has to understand that IoT is a growing area, and appreciating that they have a position in this area and trying to capitalize as much as possible from that future can actually make Cisco even bigger and bigger in terms of how they stand amongst tech companies, because it's a great opportunity for a company that can fulfill this part. And I think that Cisco should definitely try to maintain a very strong position within the collecting phase and actually be the leading company that can fulfill that. But secondly, to actually expand into cloud service and offering a substitute to AWS, to Google Cloud, to Microsoft Cloud, etc. Because it would make a lot more sense to Cisco partners to try and use Cisco throughout the whole cycle of developing Internet of Things, or to collecting data, or to transforming data, than as of now to use Cisco to collect, or to use Cisco infrastructure to collect and transfer the data, then to go to AWS, which is the most common choice, and then to use AWS again here. There is definitely the thought that if you can compete with AWS pricing, it's the easier thing to do to stick with one supplier, and you can argue that most companies would prefer that. So definitely I think that there is huge potential for Cisco to be involved in the cloud industry and actually develop their own cloud infrastructure. And they already have a lot of potential since Cisco is a company that does produce a lot of hardware for servers and for cloud infrastructure to work. So this is probably an area which, if Cisco ignores, it will be a shame in the future. But if they embrace, they really have a lot of potential to play here, because there will be more and more companies that need cloud storage, and for sure there will be potential. As for the other two areas, I wouldn't necessarily say that they should focus on them. I do think that they could, just as part of the portfolio, because it's, again, better to have all those services offered to the partner without them having to change the company. But I think that these are definitely the two areas which Cisco should prioritize, grow in this one and stabilize even more in this one. And I think that's it.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions? Two questions. Any questions? Nobody? Nancy? Anyone? All right. No questions. All right, cool. So I'll go into the feedback then. I think it was a great presentation. Definitely learned some cool stuff. I really liked your intro. It was a good hook. That's something that a lot of good presenters do, is they really come in with that strong hook to really get the audience engaged and ready for the presentation. Asking all those different questions, having you raise your hand, that allows everyone to be involved and feel like they're part of the presentation. So really good job there. You had a great use of colors. I liked your concise agenda slide, and it highlighted the different points, and you stuck to those points, which was good. At the conclusion of it, you could kind of just wrap up a little bit saying one thing that I've always heard is in a presentation, you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them.
Yeah.
So the beginning was great. You told us. At the end, maybe I really did like the Cisco, how you brought it all back to that and what we can do in the future. But maybe just really quickly just go over what we did. But I think that's being nitpicky. You had good presentation skills of using the space instead of just kind of standing over there. A couple times you walked back and forth a little bit, which was good. Again, another nitpicky thing is if you have a whiteboard, maybe try to just do something on it.
Yeah.
That's something that they try to teach us a lot at Cisco. That for this presentation might not have been as necessary, but use all the media that you have if you can. But like I said, good job using the space, walking around using hand gestures. Good presentation skills there. If you are worried about time, just bring a watch or ask someone.
Yeah, I
to borrow
wanted to use
mine.
the timer, but.
Yeah, that's fine, but that's not a big deal either. You did stay within the allotted time, so that was good. You're the first presentation out of the 4 so far, so good job there. Good job with interesting use cases in the slide format. I really liked how you had it in rows with a picture, the title highlighted, and then instead of just boring bullet points, you had little symbols. That was really cool. I'll probably end up using that in some of my presentations. It just looked good up there rather than just the boring PowerPoint template that they have. The flow was well organized. I felt like you weren't bouncing back and forth. It was pretty fluid, and you went through the steps. You took time on designing those steps too, because I thought that all those topics were pretty relevant. There's so many topics within big data that you could have done that I know you definitely took the time to kind of make it relevant to us. This is nitpicky again, but maybe something to engage in the middle of the presentation. So the beginning was great, we were all engaged. In the middle, you kind of just were like running the show, which is fine. But you can always throw in like a meme like Rom had, or like a joke, or just like something to kind of like get us I can't think of the word, but get our attention again.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I had. I really like the relation to Cisco at the end as well, and hopefully Cisco can actually listen to you. We can send this to Chuck and actually do some of those things. But overall, really good. Great presentation.
Thanks.
And cool, does anyone else have anything they wanted to bring up or share, or that we're not recording? Everything's going all right?